Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Every comment helps these disturbing stories find their way back to you. Now, let's step into the darkness. I should have known something was wrong the moment the highway dipped into that long, empty stretch west of Prince George, where the road thins, the woods tighten, and the snow starts feeling like it's falling just for you. I'd driven that route 100 times for work, but that night the silence in my truck felt heavier. Not bad weather, not black ice, just something I couldn't put a name to. The kind of quiet that makes you check your mirrors more than usual. The kind that makes you listen for things you normally ignore. I was hauling a load of industrial batteries to a site near Vanderhoof. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. It was just past 9 p.m. The snow had started drifting sideways, and the highway was nearly abandoned except for the occasional logging truck roaring the opposite direction. I remember tightening my grip on the wheel when the radio cut out. No static, no fading, just dead. It felt too sudden, too clean. I tapped the screen twice, then gave up. The silence in the cab wrapped around me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. About 10 minutes later, I saw the first sign of him. It was nothing dramatic, just a pair of headlights way behind me. Normally, that wouldn't mean anything. But on that stretch of Highway 16, you can go 40 minutes without seeing another car. I kept glancing in the side mirror, expecting the vehicle to either catch up or turn off. Instead, it matched my speed exactly. Not gaining, not losing distance, just staying there. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous. People drive the same speed all the time. But the longer I watched those headlights in my rearview mirror, the more I felt something tightening in my chest. They stayed at that exact distance, even when I slowed down for a curve or sped up on a straightaway. Perfectly mirrored. After 5 or 6 minutes, I felt my throat go dry. I flicked on my turn signal just to see what he'd do. If he sped up to pass, I'd feel stupid but relieved. Instead, his headlights vanished completely for a moment, then reappeared, even closer now, maybe 3 car lengths behind me. My stomach knotted. That wasn't someone casually driving. That was someone adjusting. I pressed my foot on the gas a little harder. The snow wasn't bad yet, so I brought the truck up to nearly 90. I watched the speedometer climb. When I checked the mirror again, the headlights were still there. Same distance, same position, same perfect follow. I'm not a paranoid guy. I work remote sites. I do long drives. I sleep in my truck sometimes. But something about the way those lights hovered behind me made every instinct I had sit bolt upright. I tapped the steering wheel, then hit my high beams, trying to catch some reflection in the woods ahead. Anything to take my mind off the pressure at my back. But the road stayed empty. Just me. And him. The first real spike of fear hit when I passed a No Services 60 km sign. Because that's when truck to pull into. If I could cut into it fast, maybe he'd fly past and lose the chance to follow. I checked the mirror one last time. He was still right there. No sign of slowing. No hesitation. Just locked in on me. My heart hammered so hard it made my vision blur. I flicked my turn signal, not to warn him, but to buy myself 1 second of distraction, and tightened both hands on the wheel. I waited. 5 seconds. 3, 1. Then I yanked the truck hard into the service road without warning. Snow exploded around the cab. The truck fishtailed. Tires screamed. The back end swung wide. I fought to keep control as the headlights behind me flashed, first surprised, then violent. He swerved. Hard. I heard the roar of his engine as he overcorrected, then the sudden, unmistakable sound of metal grinding against metal. My truck slid to a stop sideways in the snowbank, heart slamming in my throat. I twisted around in the seat to look back at the highway, just in time to see his truck. Skidding. Turning, sliding across the road, and slamming into the guardrail with a sound that cut through every inch of the night. Silence. Then his headlights flickered. Once. Twice. Dimming. dying. The snow swallowed the sound. The world went still again. I sat there gripping the wheel, breathing like I'd been underwater for 5 minutes straight. Snow tapped against the windows. The engine hummed quietly. The whole forest felt like it was listening. And then, just as I reached for my phone to check service, just as I swallowed the lump in my throat, I saw the driver's side door of his truck open. Slowly, calmly, like nothing had happened. Someone stepped out into the snow. Someone who didn't limp, didn't stumble, didn't show the slightest sign of being in a crash. He stood there, tall, still, facing me. And then he started walking toward the service road, not rushing, not panicked, not injured, just walking straight, deliberate, focused. My blood turned cold, because even from that distance, I could see that he was holding something in his right hand, something metallic, something long, something meant to be used up close. I tried to shift into reverse, but the truck didn't move. The back wheels were buried deep in the snowbank. He kept walking, straight toward me. He kept coming toward me, steady, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world, and the snowstorm existed just to muffle everything except his footsteps crunching across the highway. I slammed the gear into reverse again, uselessly spinning the tires deeper into the bank. The truck lurched but didn't move. All I could do was watch him close the distance between us with that calm, predatory walk. The object in his hand became clearer as he stepped off the highway and onto the service road. It was a tire iron, not just held, gripped, pointed down, the way someone holds something they fully intend to use. My breathing turned sharp and uneven. I wiped my palms on my jeans, but they were already sweaty despite the freezing air. The snow around us was thickening fast, obscuring everything except him, maybe 20 yards away now. His jacket was dark, heavy, and zipped high. A hood shadowed his face. No visible features, no expression to read. Just that slow, deliberate approach. I reached for my phone, praying for a single bar of service. My thumb shook so much I almost dropped it. The screen flickered to life. No service. My stomach dropped. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and looked back out the windshield. 15 yards now. 10. I tried the horn, hoping it might scare him off or at least alert someone else on the highway, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. It echoed into nothing. He didn't even flinch. I locked the doors, even though they were already locked. A pointless reflex. He was close enough now that I could see the frost forming around the edges of his hood as he breathed, each exhale caught in the wind. I did the only thing I hadn't tried. I slammed the truck into drive and gunned the engine. The front wheels spun wildly. The whole cab vibrated. Snow flew up in a white spray. The truck moved an inch, maybe 2, but not enough. The plow of packed snow I'd slid into was too deep. I hit the steering wheel and cursed under my breath. He didn't speed up, didn't break stride. Just kept walking straight at me like he'd expected all of this. At 5 yards away, he finally stopped. He stood just far enough back that I couldn't make out his eyes, just the dark shadow of where they should have been under the hood. Snowflakes drifted between us, landing on the tire iron he held loosely at his side. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he tapped the tire iron lightly against his leg. A slow, rhythmic metal on fabric sound. Tap, tap, tap. I swallowed hard. He raised his free hand, gloved, and pointed at my passenger door. Not a threat, a gesture, as if telling me, "Open it." I shook my head. It was involuntary. My brain rejected the idea before I could even process it. He tilted his head slightly, just a few degrees, like he was acknowledging my refusal. The tire iron lifted an inch higher in his grip, then lowered again, like a patient reminder. I didn't know what to do. Run, fight, stay inside and hope. He made the decision for me. He stepped toward the truck again, closing the gap until he was right up against the passenger side door. He rested one gloved hand on the handle. He looked at me through the window, though I still couldn't see his face, and then he pulled. The handle clicked, locked. He tried again, another click, then another. Then he slammed his palm against the window, once hard enough to make me jerk in my seat. The window didn't break, but he learned something important. The glass wasn't as frozen as he thought. It flexed. It bowed. He stepped back slightly, adjusting his grip on the tire iron. That's when I knew. He wasn't trying to scare me. He wasn't trying to rob me. He wasn't panicking after a crash. He was going to break the window, and then he was going to pull me out. My hand slammed on the horn repeatedly, hoping anyone was nearby. But the highway was empty. The snow swallowed the sound before it could reach the tree line. He lifted the tire iron shoulder high, angled it toward the window, and that's when headlights appeared on the highway. Both of us turned at the same time. A pair of bright white lights cut through the snow, getting closer fast. I felt a rush of air leave my lungs I didn't realize I'd been holding. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. But the man didn't run. He lowered the tire iron slowly, backing away from my truck one careful step at a time. He didn't panic, didn't rush, just moved into the shadows of the service road, blending into the trees at the edge like he'd rehearsed it. Within seconds, he was gone, consumed by the wall of snowfall. The new vehicle slowed on the highway. A logging truck, massive, bright orange hazard lights blinking. The driver spotted my truck in the snowbank and hit the brakes hard, coming to a stop just before the bridge. I leaned out my window, waving both arms. He saw me and jumped down from the cab, crunching through the snow toward me. "You all right?" he shouted over the wind. "There's someone..." My voice cracked. "There's someone out there. He followed me. He crashed. He has a weapon." The driver's expression changed instantly. He scanned the tree line, his eyes narrowing. "Get in my truck, now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and jacket and bolted. The logging truck's cab was warm, loud, safe. The driver locked the doors behind me. We tried calling the RCMP, but the signal was weak and kept dropping. Eventually, a short message got through. The driver didn't want to stay still on the highway. He kept the truck crawling forward slowly, eyes scanning the trees. By the time officers reached the area, the snow was nearly white out. They couldn't find footprints, couldn't find the pickup, couldn't find any sign of a man walking through the woods. Everything was buried. They assumed the crash victim got disoriented and wandered off. I knew better, because before the logging truck pulled away, just before we lost sight of the service road, I saw something in the snowbanks that the driver didn't notice. A set of prints, deep, deliberate, leading away from the crash site, but not toward the tree line. They led parallel to the highway for nearly 100 feet, and then stopped, just stopped, as if he'd stepped onto the road, or into a passing vehicle, or stood there watching us in the storm, waiting for us to leave. I never drove that stretch at night again. I never took another job to Vanderhoof. And I never forgot one terrifying truth about that night. The moment I swerved and sent him crashing into the guardrail. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He didn't try to escape the wreck. He stepped out calmly, like it wasn't an accident, like he'd expected it, like the real plan was always meant to happen after the crash. And he walked toward me with a tire iron. Steady, slow, certain, because he knew something I didn't. There was nobody else coming. Nobody else on that entire highway, except the driver he had chosen. I used to think the most dangerous part of winter highway maintenance in northern Alberta was the ice, or the whiteouts, or the semis that rode your bumper, even when the plows were out. But none of that came close to what I saw during the winter of 2018. What still wakes me up at night, sweaty and shaking because it wasn't a storm or a crash or some freak accident. It was a man, a real man, living in the snowdrifts along Highway 43. I was 27 that year, working night shifts with Alberta Transportation. My job was nothing glamorous, checking plow routes, clearing small obstacles, marking hazards for morning crews, that kind of thing. Nights were usually dead quiet, especially after midnight. Most nights I'd drive the stretch between Fox Creek and Little Smoky without seeing another soul for half an hour. But that January, something changed. It started small. Trash bags torn open on the shoulder, random footprints around them, sometimes bare footprints in the snow, as if someone had been walking along the highway with no boots. I'd radio it in and clean up when ordered, but I remember thinking, who walks barefoot in 20 degrees Celsius? No one believed me. No cameras caught anything. The trail always vanished at the tree line. Then the sleeping bags started showing up, not laid out, not abandoned, embedded into the deep wind-packed drifts like someone had carved out a hollow and slept inside the snow using it as insulation. The idea made me queasy. The drifts were sometimes 6, 7 feet high and rock hard. You'd need a shovel or very strong hands to dig into them. Still, I told myself, maybe it was hunters or hitchhikers. But then came the night of January 26th, the night I met him. It was around 1:45 a.m. My truck heater was blasting, my thermos was empty, and I was exhausted. A light snowfall drifted across the highway, barely visible in my headlights. I was scanning the right shoulder when some shape, broke the smooth texture of the snowdrift. At first, I thought it was trash. Then I thought it was an animal buried by the wind. But when I slowed down, the shape moved. My heart skipped. I hit the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder, staring through the windshield. The shape rose, slow and stiff, like someone lifting themselves out of a grave. Snow slid off him in sheets. A human figure, tall, thin, wearing a tattered parka with no hood, hair frozen into clumps that stuck to the side of his face. He didn't brush the snow off. He didn't react to the headlights. He just stood there, inches away from the passenger door, staring through the glass at me. I froze with my hand hovering over the radio mic. There were no boots on his feet, just blue, swollen, frostbitten skin cracked open in places, skin that should have been black and dead days ago. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably less than 10 seconds. His breath fogged the window, not frantic, not shivering, almost controlled. Then his hand lifted. Slowly, purposefully, he pressed his palm flat to the glass and dragged it downward. The squeaking sound of wet skin against cold glass. God, even now it makes my stomach clench. When he reached the bottom of the window, he crouched, lowering himself until his face lined up with mine. Close enough for me to see his lips had bled through the cracks. Close enough to see the whites of his eyes weren't white anymore, just a sickly pink from burst blood vessels. Close enough to see he was smiling, not wide, not cartoonish, just a slight upward curl of gratitude, as if he'd found exactly who he'd been waiting for. Instinct snapped me out of the trance. I grabbed the mic and called dispatch, trying to keep my voice steady. Before they could answer, he moved, fast. Too fast for someone so frozen. He stood upright again and started circling the truck. I clicked the locks. He tapped the passenger window with one finger. Tap, tap, tap. Then he moved to the back door. Tap, tap, tap. My breath fogged the glass in front of me. He circled the truck twice, tapping each door, each window, testing them like he was mapping out which one he'd break first. Then he stopped behind the truck. My brake lights cast a faint red glow on him. He bent forward, placing both hands on the rear bumper, and lowered his head like he was trying to look underneath. At first, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. He was checking if anyone else was with me, the way an animal checks if it can drag something alone. My chest tightened. My vision tunneled. I shifted the truck into drive. The moment the engine revved, he snapped his head up and sprinted along the side, slamming his palms against the driver door. I screamed and floored it. The tires spun on the icy shoulder, fishtailing toward the highway. The truck bounced, caught traction, and shot forward. In my rearview mirror, the man ran after me, not stumbling, not collapsing from cold. Full sprint, feet bare, arms pumping, face locked into something completely devoid of fear. He chased my truck for almost 30 seconds, only stopped when the snowdrift shadow swallowed him again. My hand shook so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I kept radioing dispatch like a madman until they responded and told me to go straight back to Fox Creek Base. I did. I parked. I got inside. and I refused to go back out. The next day, RCMP combed the section of highway. No man, no tracks, no signs of anyone living in the drifts. They told me snow can bury footprints quickly during the night. They told me maybe I saw a drunk or a transient. They told me bodies can do strange things under hypothermia. None of it explained the thing that kept eating at me. Bare, frostbitten feet cannot sprint. They cannot chase a truck at full speed. They cannot cross snow without leaving deep impressions. They cannot smile. That was the night I quit highway maintenance for good. But it wasn't the end. 3 weeks later, the highway cameras finally caught something. Just a single frame. A dark shape emerging from a hard-packed drift. No face, no details. Just a figure stepping onto the shoulder at 3:14 a.m. The timestamp made my stomach drop. It was the exact minute I passed that same location on my way home that night. I never told anyone what I saw after that, because the frame had a second detail most people wouldn't notice. He wasn't facing the highway. He was facing the ditch, toward the tree line, toward the spot where a dark pickup truck had slid off earlier that night. RCMP ruled it an accident. They never found the driver. For the first few days after the incident, I kept telling myself he'd freeze to death. No boots, no gloves. Lips cracked to blood. Skin splitting open from cold. Logically, biologically, medically, he should have been dead before I ever even saw him. But logic had nothing to do with that man. He wasn't surviving the cold. He was using it. I didn't realize how close he still was until the following Thursday. I was living in temporary housing in Fox Creek at the time, a tiny rental behind a closed-down diner. The place barely had insulation, but it was cheap, and 2 minutes from the highway base. That night, just past midnight, I was brushing my teeth when I heard what sounded like someone brushing snow off a window. You know the sound. Wet flakes dragged across glass, soft and delicate. I froze with the toothbrush still in my mouth. The sound came again. Longer this time. Not scraping, not tapping, just clearing. I stepped slowly toward the living room window, toothbrush still hanging from my mouth, foam dripping down my chin without me realizing. The curtain was drawn. My hand was shaking when I pulled it back. There was nothing there, just blackness, just cold glass, but the snow on the outside of the window. It had been brushed away in a perfect half circle, a viewing spot, the exact size of a human face. My heart started hammering so loud it almost drowned out the wind. I grabbed my phone and dialed a coworker, Mark, who lived 3 buildings down. He picked up instantly. Night shift guys always do. "What's wrong?" he asked. "There's someone outside my place." "Call RCMP. Just come here first, please." He didn't even argue. He said he'd be there in 3 minutes. I waited by the door, pulse thundering in my ears. I kept glancing back at the half-cleaned window. The silence outside felt thick, like something was pressing its weight against it, listening for movement inside. The knock, when it finally came, almost made me jump out of my skin, not at the door. On the wall. A single, heavy knock from outside, level with my shoulder. Too far from the door for it to be a visitor. Too precise for it to be the wind. My legs locked. My breath hitched. The knocking came again, harder. It wasn't someone asking to come in. From a dash cam on one of the plow trucks returning to base at 2:17 a.m., 15 minutes before I called Mark. The footage showed the plow driving slowly past my rental street. Nothing unusual, nothing in the road. But then, just before the plow turned the corner, a figure appeared briefly in the frame, standing in the snow just 20 feet from my building. Facing the plow, completely still. The plow's lights illuminated him perfectly. No parka, no gloves, no boots, just bare, freezing skin, cracked and white, bones visible at the knuckles, frostbite eating into the toes. His lips were split open, exposing red sores, his eyes bloodshot, and he was smiling, a full, wide, cold smile, directly at the camera, knowing they wouldn't stop, knowing he would be gone by the time they turned around. The footage lasted only half a second. Then the angle shifted. He vanished. The RCMP archived the file. I quit that same day. I moved to Calgary. I haven't gone near Fox Creek since. But the ending isn't what you think. 3 months later, after the thaw, RCMP found a body in the ditch near a popular rest stop outside Valley View. A hiker spotted it sticking out from a melted snowbank. The coroner estimated the man had been dead since November. 2 months before, he chased my truck. 3 months before he stood outside my window. 4 months before he smiled into the plow cam. His official time of death. 6 weeks before the first snowdrift sleeping bags were found. They never identified him. They never explained the footprints. They never found anyone else living in the snow. They listed the incident as a misidentified transient case, but I know exactly what I saw. And every winter, when the first heavy snowfall hits, I still think of him. The man whose frozen face pressed against my window in the quiet of a Fox Creek night. Not alive, not undead, just someone who refused to stay where he was left. When I moved into the basement suite of a 3-story building in southwest Calgary, I thought I'd finally hit a streak of luck. The rent was cheap, utilities included, private entrance, newly renovated. It wasn't glamorous, but for $975 a month, I didn't care. The hallway down there was narrow, 2 doors across from each other, mine on the left, my neighbor's on the right. The landlord told me an older man lived across from me, quiet, barely ever home, harmless as they come. I never saw him, not once, not even a shadow under his door. His door was always closed, always locked, always dark. Fine, whatever. Quiet neighbors are the best kind. But on my first night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard it. A click. Then another. Then a third. The unmistakable sound of someone unlocking and relocking multiple locks. Slowly, deliberately, like someone standing behind their door with their ear pressed against the wood, turning each lock 1 notch at a time. I stopped brushing my teeth and listened. Click, clack, pause, click, click. I figured maybe he had anxiety, or OCD, or was just a light sleeper. It didn't bother me. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same sequence, same slow methodical pace. Click, click, click. By the 4th night, I put a glass to the wall and pressed my ear to it like an idiot. I could actually hear him breathing, slow, controlled, like he was standing still on the other side of the wall, listening for movement on my side. I backed away from the wall and turned the TV on just to fill the silence. That was the first week. By week 2, things escalated. It started with the photographs. I came home late one evening to find a small white envelope on my welcome mat. No writing, no tape, just a slip of glossy paper barely sticking out. Inside was a single photo of my door, taken from about 6 inches above the floor, angle slightly upward, low enough that the photographer either crouched or lay down on the ground. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe the landlord left it as evidence of a repair or something. I texted him, "Did you drop off a photo at my door?" He responded immediately, "What photo?" My stomach tightened. I didn't sleep that night. At 2:17 a.m., the clicking started again. Slow, patient, right across the hall. The next morning, I slid the photo under the landlord's door upstairs. He texted me saying he'd talked to the tenant, but he never followed up. A few days later, another envelope appeared on my floor. This one had 3 photos, each one of the bottom inch of my door, same angle, same perspective, taken on different days, judging from the changing dust patterns. Someone had been lying on the hallway floor, putting their face right at the gap beneath my door and taking pictures. I felt sick. That night, I stayed awake just to listen. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the locks across the hall clicked. This time, instead of the slow rhythm, it was faster. Click, 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 like someone fidgeting with excitement. Then a new sound, a soft scrape, metal brushing across the floor, edges dragging lightly. I got down on my knees and looked under my own door. I shouldn't have. A pair of shoes, black, laces missing, stood inches from my side, perfectly still, facing my door. He was standing there, right in front of me, absolutely motionless. A shadow moved above the shoes, like he had crouched. Then a sound, exhaling, slowly, deliberately. I jerked back so fast I slammed into the wall, my heart hammered in my throat. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord. He didn't answer. I texted him, "Someone is outside my door." No reply. I sat in my bed, blanket pulled up to my chest, staring at the door until sunrise. I didn't even dare blink. The next day, I demanded the landlord open the neighbor's door. He refused. Privacy rights, tenant boundaries, legal issues. He promised to check on him. I didn't believe that for a second. I bought a camera and placed it inside my living room, facing the door. That night, I waited. 2:17 a.m. Click, click, click. I held my breath. 3 minutes later, the camera notification buzzed my phone. Motion detected. I opened the app. My breath left my body. The camera showed a dark shadow on the floor. Then a hand slid under the door, not reaching, not grabbing, just resting flat against the floor like he was feeling the warmth of my apartment through the wood. The fingers twitched, barely, like he was savoring the temperature. Then the hand disappeared. The next morning, I packed my things. I didn't care about the lease. I didn't care about losing my deposit. I didn't care about anything except getting out. I opened my door, but before I stepped out, my eyes drifted across the hall. His door was slightly ajar. For the first time ever, a note lay on the floor in front of it. My name, handwritten, shaky letters. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside, only one sentence. "You're awake when I am." I dropped it, ran upstairs, burst into the landlord's unit. He wasn't home, but his office door was open. Inside was a file cabinet with tenant folders. I found mine, I found the neighbors, and I found something else, something that froze me to my core. The folder across from mine, the one belonging to the man who never opened his door, had a single sheet of paper in it. A tenant form, name line blank, emergency contact blank, ID blank, lease signature blank. Under occupancy start date, it said deceased. And the date was from 2019, 3 years ago. I staggered back, almost falling. Someone was living in that unit. Someone the landlord never registered. Someone who watched me for weeks. Someone who photographed me. Someone who listened to me breathe through the walls. Someone who wasn't supposed to exist on paper. Then, the worst realization hit me. If he wasn't on the lease, if he wasn't the original tenant, then he chose that basement room on purpose. He chose me on purpose. And if he knew I was awake when he definitely knew I was leaving. When I realized the folder said deceased, where a name should have been, something cold and electric slid down my spine. My brain wanted to rationalize it. Maybe the landlord messed up paperwork. Maybe it was an old file he hadn't updated. But the moment I stepped away from the cabinet, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The kind of prickle you feel when someone is standing just behind your shoulder, quietly breathing in your direction. I turned around so fast I nearly fell, but the hallway was empty. Just soft basement lighting and the faint hum of the furnace rising through the vent. Still, I didn't trust it. I grabbed my jacket, my backpack, my keys, and headed for the stairs, deciding I would leave everything else behind. As I reached the second flight of steps, I heard the basement door below me creak open. Not quickly, not abruptly. Just a slow, heavy, deliberate shift of hinges that whispered up the stairwell. My heart lurched so violently that my vision wavered. I tried to calm myself enough to keep moving, but curiosity, or fear, got the better of me. I turned my head slightly and saw a sliver of the basement hallway visible through the gap in the door. The neighbor's door, his door, was now wide open. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I sprinted upstairs and out of the building, the icy January air punching my lungs hard enough to hurt. I ran straight to my car parked under the flickering lot light, but as I reached for the handle, movement caught my eye. The window blinds in the laundry room window were shifting, as if someone inside had pulled a cord too slowly. Someone was watching from inside the building, someone who knew I was leaving. I got in the car and locked the doors, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys into the footwell. When I leaned down to grab them, headlights swept across the parking lot, followed by the crunch of tires. A white SUV pulled in. It was the landlord. He stepped out with a grocery bag tucked under his arm, shouting my name with a confused laugh, as if I were doing something silly by sitting in my car, panicked. He walked toward me, calling out questions. "What's wrong? Why are you shaking? Why is the basement door open?" But I didn't answer until he saw my expression and realized this wasn't a misunderstanding or a tenant meltdown. Something was terribly wrong. I forced myself to speak, stumbling through the words as I tried to explain what I'd heard, what I'd seen, the photos, the hand under the door, the file marked deceased. He stiffened instantly. The color drained from his face like someone had injected ice water into his veins. Without a word, he put his grocery bag on the hood of my car and walked toward the basement entrance. I followed, staying close behind him even though every part of me wanted to run the opposite direction. The hallway light buzzed overhead as we reached the bottom. His door was open. Mine was closed. The air was cold, much colder than normal, and carried the faint metallic smell of damp concrete and something else, something earthy and stale. The landlord approached the open door cautiously, raising his phone to use as a flashlight. The light cut through the darkness of the room, revealing only an empty mattress on the floor, a pile of blankets, and dozens of photographs taped to the wall opposite the bed. My face was in almost everyone, sleeping on my couch, cooking, coming out of the shower, watching TV, even brushing my teeth. Pictures taken through the tiny cracks between my curtain and the window frame. Pictures taken through the peephole. Pictures taken from under my door as I walked past, the angle unmistakable. The landlord cursed under his breath and stepped inside, scanning the corners, checking behind the door, searching the tiny bathroom attached to the suite. The place was empty, but the mattress was still warm. That detail shattered the last bit of composure I had left. Whoever had been living here, whoever had fixated on me, left only minutes before we entered. And he hadn't just been photographing me. He had been watching me, learning me, timing me. I stepped backward until I was pressed against the hallway wall. The landlord dialed 911 with trembling hands, telling them there was a break-in, possible squatter, disturbed tenant, no ID, a room full of surveillance photos. While he spoke, I glanced down the hall, and that's when I saw the shoe prints. Not footprints. Shoe prints. Mine, crisp, clear, black water-soaked impressions leading from the entrance of my apartment out into the hall. Only, I hadn't walked there today. I stared at them, brain scrambling to make sense of how my footprint pattern could be in places I hadn't stepped. The prints led all the way to the neighbor's open door. The realization hit me with a nausea so intense I had to steady myself on the wall. He had been inside my unit, multiple times, walking in my shoes, stepping where I stepped, leaving prints that looked like mine to hide his own. I imagined him slipping silently into my apartment as I slept, lifting my shoes, putting them on slowly, carefully, so the floor would never reveal him. That thought burned itself into my mind so permanently I knew I'd never forget it. RCMP arrived fast, faster than I expected. Officers searched the basement, then the building, then the yard, then the alley behind the dumpsters. They found nothing except a narrow, hand-dug space underneath the neighbor's bathtub, a hidden crawl space carved into the foundation and just large enough for a human body to curl inside. Inside that crawl space, they found a thin blanket, a plastic bottle of water, and a small stack of envelopes, the same kind left under my door. I moved out the next morning. Boxes, clothes, toothbrush, everything. I didn't even take half of what I owned. I signed no exit papers, Asked no questions, fought no arguments. I left Calgary within a week. The landlord paid for all my moving costs, even offered to pay for temporary lodging until I found a new place. He never once asked me to stay or downplay what happened. I think he genuinely didn't want to know what could have happened if I stayed there longer. 2 weeks later, an officer called me with an update. They'd finally identified the man who had been living across from me, not by name. They still didn't know who he was, but by CCTV footage. Footage showing him following me weeks before I'd even signed the lease. Footage showing him breaking into the building, slipping unnoticed into the basement, choosing the room opposite mine before I ever moved in. Footage showing exactly how long he waited for a tenant to occupy the unit he wanted to watch. But the officer told me the part that mattered most. They caught him. A neighbor in a complex downtown recognized his face from police bulletins. He was hiding behind a shed, watching people through a vent, waiting for an opportunity. He didn't resist arrest, didn't struggle, didn't speak. Just smiled at the officers when they cuffed him, as if he was finally done waiting for something. I hung up the phone and cried. Relief, fear, disbelief, it all slammed into me at once. It was the first night since that building that I slept in a home without waking up at 2:17 a.m., listening for clicks. The happy ending wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was simply this. He's gone. I'm safe. And I will never live in a basement apartment again, because some doors stay shut for a reason, and some people open them without ever making a sound. I took the off-season cleanup job at Lac Miroir Campground because I thought it would be easy money. 3 weeks of clearing debris, winterizing cabins, doing maintenance work, and checking the shoreline before the freeze. The campground sat about 40 minutes north of Mont-Laurier, surrounded by dense Quebec forest and a lake that looked black when the wind hit it just right. Only 2 cabins had working electricity this time of year, the main staff cabin by the water and the one they assigned to me, Cabin 7. Everything else was locked up, shutters latched, power cut, beds stripped. The kind of silent emptiness that makes the whole campground feel like it's holding its breath. On my first night, the camp ranger, Michel, handed me my key and laughed when I asked which cabins were still in use. "Only yours," he said. "And don't mind Cabin 9. It creaks in the wind, but nobody's in there." I didn't even know why he mentioned it. The layout was simple. Cabins 6, 7, 8, and 9 lined the ridge, overlooking the lake. Cabin 9 was farthest from the staff cabin, sitting half in shadow beneath a cluster of tall pines. It looked abandoned from the moment I saw it. The weirdness started on night 2. I had finished clearing brush near the dock and went inside to heat a can of soup. As soon as the microwave hum filled the small room, I heard a voice. A man's voice, low, muffled, coming from the wall behind the bed. At first, I thought it was a radio left on somewhere. Maybe Michelle was checking the pipes outside. But the moment I muted the microwave, the voice stopped. Completely. No footsteps, no fading. Just gone. When I turned the microwave back on, the voice came back. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the wooden wall. The voice was clearer now, still muffled, but definitely a man speaking quietly, like he was having a conversation. Except it wasn't a normal conversation. He was whispering something rhythmic, a pattern, a repeating string of soft murmurs, rising and falling like he was reciting something directly into the wall. I felt my scalp tighten. I unplugged the microwave. The hum died, and the whispering immediately stopped. The silence afterward was somehow worse. I stood there frozen, staring at the wall separating my cabin from the one next door, Cabin 8. It was locked for the season. I had seen Michel seal the windows himself earlier that day. A cold draft slipped through the floorboards, carrying the faint smell of damp wood. My nerves were already frayed, but when I noticed that the whispering seemed to sync with the hum of whatever appliance I turned on, I told myself it had to be sound traveling from outside. Maybe there were hunters in the woods. Maybe someone had camped too close to the ridge. Maybe radios were bouncing signals. That night, around 1:30 a.m., I woke to the same murmuring. Not loud, not aggressive, just soft words threading through the wooden wall like they belonged there. I didn't move. I barely breathed, because the cadence of the whispering had changed, slower, more intentional, like someone leaning close and speaking directly at a single person. Me. My name broke through the quiet, not shouted, not even clearly pronounced, just breathed. A soft, shaky exhale of my name, drawn out in a whisper so thin it made my skin erupt in goosebumps. I bolted upright, fumbling for my flashlight, shining it across the room, as if light alone could stop a voice from coming through a wall. The whispering didn't stop immediately. It stretched for a few seconds, almost like whoever was on the other side was finishing a sentence. Then it cut off mid-breath, replaced by a dead, heavy silence. My throat felt tight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went straight to the staff cabin. Michelle was making coffee, surprised to see me so early. I told him everything, the whispering, the voice, the fact I heard my name. His smile faded. He shook his head, insisting cabin 8 and 9 were sealed, no staff inside, no one staying here but me. He suggested I'd been spooked by forest acoustics. Sound traveled strangely at the lake. Echoes behaved weirdly when the temperature dropped. But he offered to check the cabins with me anyway. Cabin 8. Locked, secure, shutters bolted, dust on the windows. Cabin 9. Same, except when Michelle tried the handle, it didn't budge. The lock was old and nearly rusted shut. He shrugged, said it had been jammed for years. I tried to brush it off, but when night came again, the murmuring returned. Not through cabin 8's wall this time. Through the floorboards, I could hear movement beneath the cabin. Not steps, not crawling. Something slower, something dragging, lightly brushing the underside of the floor like fingers tracing wooden beams. Every hair on my body stood on end. I knelt down, pressed my ear to the floor. There was breathing under there. Harsh, wet, close. I scrambled back so fast I kicked over my lantern. The flame sputtered, and for a second, all I could hear was that breathing beneath me, louder now, closer to the center of the cabin. I stood motionless, heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my teeth. Then the breathing shifted. It moved toward the wall, then upward, as if climbing, as if pulling itself along the beams inside the wall. The whispering returned, this time right behind my bed. Low, trembling, urgent. I slept in the truck that night. The next morning, I demanded Michelle open cabin 9. He refused, said it was unsafe, mold issues, rotten floor, dangerous to inspect. I didn't believe him. Not after last night. Not after hearing that voice move through wood like it lived inside the walls. So that night, I set a trap. I positioned my phone recording app against the wall next to the bed, microphone facing the boards. Then I sat in the living room with every light on, listening to the clock tick, waiting for the familiar 1:30 a.m. whispering to begin. Except it didn't. The cabin stayed utterly silent. No murmurs, no breathing, no movement. Until something tapped the window. One soft tap, then another. I turned slowly. A smudge on the glass caught the moonlight. A smear. Like a nose or forehead had been pressed against it. But it wasn't a face shape. It was lower. Much lower. Almost level with the bottom of the window. Someone had crouched there, watching. No footsteps, no retreat. Just a faint smear of skin oil. I backed away, grabbing my coat, boots, keys. I planned to sleep in the truck again, maybe even drive all the way back to town. But as I stepped onto the porch, I heard it. A door creaking open. Down the path, slow, reluctant. Old wood straining against rusted hinges. Cabin 9, the one Michelle said hadn't been opened in years. Its door was now cracked open just enough to show a thin wedge of darkness inside. Fresh footprints, bare human footprints, were stamped into the mud between cabin 9 and my porch. I aimed my flashlight at the footprints. They led straight to my door, and then straight back to cabin 9. I took one step backward, ready to retreat. That's when something inside cabin 9 moved. Not loudly, not fast, just enough to push the door a fraction wider. I froze completely. A hand, pale, thin, wrong, slipped out and curled around the edge of the doorframe. The whispering began again. But this time, it wasn't coming through walls. It was coming from inside cabin 9, and it was speaking a sentence I couldn't fully make out, except the last word. My name. The hand gripping the edge of cabin 9's doorway didn't move at first. It just rested there. Thin fingers curled around splintered wood, knuckles pale against the moonlight, skin stretched tight enough to show every bone beneath it. My flashlight trembled in my grip, scattering light across the porch steps. Every instinct I had screamed to run, but something in the way that hand held its position, steady, patient, almost gentle, kept me frozen. It felt less like a threat, and more like someone waiting. I forced myself to take a slow step backward, keeping the flashlight trained on the doorway. The whispering inside cabin 9 grew sharper, less muffled than before, like the voice was now turned toward the open door rather than speaking into walls or floorboards. The cadence was strange, hushed, rapid, like someone speaking through clenched teeth. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel the intent behind them. It was the same sound I'd heard through cabin 7's walls, the same sound beneath the floorboards, the same sound at 1:30 a.m. every night. The whispering stopped abruptly when my boot snapped a twig underfoot. The hand jerked, just slightly, as though startled. Then the fingers retreated into the darkness, vanishing from sight. I felt a surge of hope that maybe whoever or whatever was inside had backed away. But hope died instantly when the door creaked open wider, slow and deliberate, revealing the interior of cabin 9. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the doorway, illuminating only part of the floor and the edge of a bed frame coated in dust. But there was no dust on the floorboards near the entrance. That part was disturbed, worn down, smudged, recently used. The whisper came again. This time, it wasn't soft. It wasn't muffled. It wasn't hiding. It came from inches inside the doorway, low and shaky, a raspy inhale followed by my name, drawn out like a sigh. Hearing it spoken so clearly, so intentionally, sent a violent tremor through my body. I took another step back, nearly slipping on the damp wood of my own porch. I wanted to scream for Michelle, for anyone, but the campground was a wide, empty void, surrounded by forest and black lake water. No one was awake. No one was close enough to hear me. The wind shifted, pushing the scent of cold earth and damp leaves across the ridge. That's when I noticed something else, something that made my stomach lurch. The footprints I'd seen in the mud earlier, the bare ones that led from cabin 9 to my porch. They weren't just footprints. They were handprints, too, faint but unmistakable, dragging marks beside the footprints, like someone had sometimes used their hands to steady themselves as they moved, leaving long smears in the mud. Whoever had walked that path hadn't walked normally. They had moved low to the ground, at times crawling, at times pulling themselves forward. And they'd been doing it for days. Before I could process that, the whispering inside cabin 9 shifted tone. It wasn't saying my name anymore. It was muttering something faster, heavier, as if whoever was inside was trying to decide something, debating, preparing, building courage. I knew I couldn't stay on the porch. I turned and backed slowly toward my truck, keeping the flashlight aimed at the open door. The distance between us felt like it doubled with each breath, but the cabin didn't move. The doorway stayed still. The whispering continued. Then the voice stopped mid-word, and I heard the sound that broke every last piece of composure I had left. Someone inside cabin 9 stood up. It was subtle. The shift of weight on creaking floorboards, the slight groan of old wood under pressure, but it was unmistakable. Someone inside had risen from a crouched or seated position. I swung the flashlight wildly, trying to catch a glimpse, but the light only revealed dust hanging in the air. Then the floorboards creaked again, closer to the doorway this time. I tightened my hold on the flashlight, trying to keep my breathing quiet. The creaking moved slowly, one cautious step at a time, each one deliberate, measured, like someone testing their own ability to walk upright after too long in the dark. I reached the truck door and fumbled with the handle, trying not to make noise. The metal clicked under my fingers. That click was enough. Inside cabin 9, something reacted. A soft exhale, a quick excited breath, escaped from the darkness. Like whoever was inside recognized the sound of my escape and was preparing to rush forward. I yanked the truck door open, climbed inside, and slammed it shut, locking it with shaking hands. My flashlight fell onto the seat, casting a diagonal beam across the dashboard. I started the engine, the headlights flaring to life. The moment the lights hit cabin 9, something moved inside. Not a full figure, not a face, just a shape crossing the narrow slice of cabin interior visible through the open door. Low to the ground, too fast, too fluid, disappearing into the shadows as soon as light touched it. I didn't wait to see more. I slammed the truck into reverse and backed down the dirt path so fast I felt the tires skid. When I turned onto the main campground road, I caught one last glimpse of cabin 9 through the trees. Its door was still open. The cabin was silent. But the footprints, those bare, smudged footprints, continued farther along the ridge than I'd realized. They didn't just go from cabin 9 to mine. They went between multiple cabins, back and forth, loops of movement, patterns of watching. Someone had been moving between these structures for a long time. I made it to the main gate and drove straight to the small police station in town. They took my report seriously. Remote areas see their share of trespassers and squatters, but when officers searched the campground at dawn, they found no one. Cabin 9 was indeed old and infested with mold, but the door wasn't locked anymore. It hung slightly ajar. Inside, they found signs someone had been living there: blankets, cans, scraps of clothing. They also found the crawl space under the bed, large enough for a person to curl inside. Recently used, still warm. But they found no one. The footprints had already been washed out by morning frost. I returned to the station to clarify details, but before I left, one of the officers pulled me aside. He said something that made my blood run cold. When they checked the door frame of cabin 9, they found fresh fingerprints. Human ones. Smudged with wood dust from the inside of the doorway. Small, thin, spread wide like someone had clung to the frame before stepping out. Fingerprints that weren't in any database. Fingerprints that matched none of the staff, none of the guests, none of the missing persons reported in the area. When I asked the officer if they'd closed cabin 9 after searching it, he hesitated. "We tried," he said, "but the door wouldn't stay shut. I haven't gone back to Lac Miroir since. I didn't return for my final check, didn't pick up my last paycheck, didn't grab the rest of my belongings from cabin 7. I left Quebec entirely. That campground can stay empty for all I care. But 2 nights ago, weeks after I left, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. Just breathing, slow, wet, familiar. At the very end, a voice whispered one word, my name, and then a second word, cabin. The line cut out before I heard the number that followed, but I didn't need it spoken aloud. I already knew which cabin he meant. When I moved into my new apartment in Saskatoon, I was mostly relieved to finally have a place to myself. After 2 years of roommates and couch hopping, a quiet one-bedroom felt like a reward. The building was old but clean, with a vintage charm that made the hardwood floors creak in a friendly way. The only thing that gave me pause was the thinness of the walls. I could sometimes hear muffled voices from the unit next door, Unit 205, but nothing alarming, just ordinary living sounds. The first time I noticed the tapping was on my 3rd night. I had just settled into bed, turned the lights off, and pulled the blanket over me when a soft, steady tapping came from the shared wall at the head of my bed. It was faint, like someone lightly drumming their fingers against the drywall. I assumed it was my neighbor repositioning furniture or adjusting something on their side. The tapping went on for about 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't think much about it. But the next night it returned. Same time, same slow, soft pattern. Always after I got into bed. This time it lasted longer, about 20 seconds, before fading. I decided I'd bring it up casually if I ran into my neighbor during the week. Annoying, but not exactly frightening. On night 5, the tapping changed. It didn't start immediately. Instead, I felt it. A vibration through the wall before hearing anything. It began faintly, like someone pressing their palm flat against the drywall and dragging it slowly downward. Dust fell from the top edge of my headboard. My body tensed automatically, telling me something about that movement wasn't normal. Then the tapping began, but now it wasn't rhythmic. It was matched. Slow taps that mirrored the exact pace of my breathing. Every inhale, a tap. Every exhale, a tap. As if whoever was on the other side wasn't just tapping. They were listening, tracking my breathing. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding, and the tapping immediately stopped. I waited, frozen, barely breathing. For a moment, it was completely silent. Then the tapping resumed, but this time lower on the wall, near the baseboards. Slow, following the pattern of my deeper, anxious breaths now. Tap, 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 each one perfectly timed. I forced myself to call out, "Hello? Can you hear me?" My voice shook. The tapping stopped immediately. Frozen, I waited for a response. Nothing. I should have left the room right then, but part of me wanted to be rational. It had to be pipes or settling wood, or just the neighbor doing something oddly repetitive. So I leaned forward and knocked once on the wall, just a simple, light knock. The response came instantly. A single knock back, closer than before. Not on the other side of the wall, inside the wall. The knock vibrated through the drywall directly behind my pillow. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away from the bed, staring at the spot where the sound originated. I wanted to believe it had been my imagination or a coincidence, but the knock was too clear, too precise, too close. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, I went to the building office and asked about the neighbor in 205. The manager, Marta, looked confused. "Oh, 205 is empty," she said. "The last tenant moved out 2 weeks before you arrived. We haven't filled it yet." I stared at her, stunned. "No one lives there." "Not at the moment, no." I tried to argue, insisted that I'd heard noise, tapping, movement. But she shrugged and said old buildings make strange sounds. Something in her tone felt dismissive, but also genuinely unconcerned. I left the office feeling more unsettled than before. That night, I decided I wouldn't sleep in the bedroom at all. I set up blankets on the couch again and turned on the living room lamp. I kept the TV playing quietly, hoping background noise would drown out any sounds from next door. For hours, everything stayed quiet. I started to believe maybe Marta was right. Around 1:15 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. As I stepped back into the living room, a sound stopped me cold. A tap from the bedroom wall, followed by another, then a third, slower and more intentional than before. I stayed rooted to the spot, staring down the dark hallway toward my open bedroom door. The apartment felt too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then came a new sound. A scraping, slow and dragging, traveling upward along the shared wall. Not frantic, not aggressive, just deliberate, like fingertips trailing through dust. My skin tightened as I realized the sound wasn't coming from a single point. It was moving. Higher, then lower, then higher again, as though whoever was behind the wall was shifting positions quietly, adjusting themselves. I inched toward the bedroom doorway, holding my breath. The room was dark except for the faint glow of streetlights through the blinds. The tapping had stopped, but the scraping continued, now coming from higher up, near the top corner where the wall met the ceiling. I flicked the light on. The scraping stopped instantly. But the room didn't feel empty. It felt observed. My eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, seeking confirmation that I was alone. And I was. Nothing looked out of place. The air felt heavy and still, until I noticed the dust on the floor, A line of dust had fallen directly beneath the top left corner of the wall, a fresh line, and the drywall there looked slightly bulged outward in the shape of pressure, as if someone had leaned against it from the other side, or was still leaning there now. I backed out slowly, locked myself in the bathroom, and called Marta again. No answer. Called again. No answer. I waited for sunrise in the tub with the shower curtain closed, too afraid to look at the hallway. When morning came, I forced myself to investigate once more. In the daylight, the bulge in the drywall was even more obvious. And the dust wasn't random, it was smeared. A pattern. Like something had pressed against the wall and dragged downward. That was when I heard it. A soft thump, not from the wall, from inside the wall, like someone shifting weight. Closer. That was the moment I realized this wasn't imagination. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't settling wood. There was space between the units, a crawl void, and someone was inside it. Someone who waited until I lay in bed. Someone who matched my breathing. Someone who moved when I moved. Someone who wanted me to know they were there. I pressed my ear to the wall. For the first time, I heard him clearly. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Right on the other side of the drywall. Barely an inch from my ear. And then, softly, he whispered, "Don't move." The moment I heard that whisper, "Don't move," every part of me locked in place. It wasn't a threat screamed through the wall, and it wasn't a hallucination. It was a quiet, intimate murmur from inches away, spoken with the kind of calm someone uses when they're already watching you closely and want to see what you'll do next. My first instinct was to run, but my body refused to obey. I stayed frozen with my ear pressed to the cold drywall, listening to the soft, uneven breathing coming from inside the wall itself. It was paced like someone adjusting their diaphragm while lying flat, trying to remain silent but unable to fully hide the sound of each inhale. My skin crawled at the realization that he wasn't far behind the drywall. He was pressed right against it. I stepped back carefully and grabbed the largest kitchen knife I owned, wishing it were something heavier. I didn't know what I planned to do with it. Stab through the wall, confront him, flee. Nothing felt like a real plan. I forced myself into the hallway and flicked on every light, trying to draw comfort from brightness. But the apartment felt smaller with every switch I flipped. The tapping returned, but softer now, as if he were moving sideways through the crawl void between our units. It shifted from behind the bed to behind the closet, then behind the bathroom mirror, tracing a path through the building's interior. Desperate for answers, I called Marta again. This time, she picked up after the third ring, sounding groggy and irritated. I told her someone was inside the wall void, not metaphorically, literally crawling inside the space between apartments. She went silent long enough that I thought she hung up, then quietly said, "I'm calling security. Stay in your unit. Don't open the door for anyone until I get there." The last part chilled me more than anything. The way she said, "anyone," told me she believed me. Minutes dragged by with nothing but the sound of shifting inside the wall. At one point, I swear I heard fabric brushing against insulation and the soft thud of an elbow hitting wood. The movement stopped behind my bedroom door. I stared at the doorknob, half expecting it to turn. Instead, a faint dragging noise slid downward inside the wall behind it, as if someone were slowly lowering themselves into position. Then came the whisper again. Not a word this time. Just a shaky exhale, so close I could almost feel it seep through the drywall. I couldn't stay. I bolted for the front door, grabbed my coat, and stepped into the hallway where the motion-activated lights flickered on one by one. I didn't lock the door. I didn't look back. I just ran for the stairwell and took the steps two at a time, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles hurt. As I turned the corner to the first-floor landing, a loud, sudden crash echoed from above me. Something slamming against my bedroom wall with enough force to shake dust from the light fixtures in the hallway. I didn't wait to see what caused it. I dashed out the front entrance of the building into the cold morning air, adrenaline overpowering the freezing wind. I ran straight to Marta's office, banging on the door until she answered. Marta and the building's private security guard accompanied me back upstairs 20 minutes later. By then, the sun was rising, casting long lines of pale light across the hallway. My door was slightly open. I knew I had shut it. I knew. The security guard drew his flashlight and entered first, while Marta stayed behind me, clutching her phone. The living room was untouched. The kitchen was untouched. Everything looked normal until the guard reached the bedroom. He froze. "You need to see this," he said. The drywall behind my bed had been pushed outward, cracked in a long vertical line where someone had pressed against it repeatedly. The knife I had dropped earlier was lying on the floor, not where I left it. Dust was scattered across the floorboards. And worst of all, the closet door was not just open. It was fully removed from its hinges and leaning against the opposite wall. The guard shined his flashlight inside the empty closet, but it wasn't empty. Behind the hanging rod, I saw a thin vertical seam where the drywall panel didn't match the paint. The guard pressed it lightly with his palm, and the panel shifted inward like a loose hatch. When he removed it, a cold draft spilled out, along with the smell of insulation and dirt. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for a human body, containing flattened insulation, fingerprints, and scattered food wrappers. Someone had been living in there. Watching through nail holes he had widened. Listening through beams he leaned against. Moving through the walls around my apartment with full access to the entire vertical shaft of the building. Security called the police immediately. When RCMP arrived, they searched every access point behind the walls. The void connected all the way to the roof. They found long marks where hands and knees had dragged through dust and beams. They found nesting spots, small, clearings in the insulation where someone had slept. They found a tiny flashlight wedged between floor joists. They found fibers from clothing caught on nails, but they didn't find him. He was gone. But they did find something else. A small folded piece of lined paper tucked behind the drywall panel in my closet. My name was written on the outside in shaky, uneven handwriting. Inside was only one sentence, barely legible, and written at an odd slant. "You breathe louder when you're scared." That was enough. I moved out that same day. Marta helped me break the lease. Police set up patrols and sealed the crawl void. I stayed at a hotel, then moved across the province. Months went by without incident. But last week, I received a package at my new address. No return name, no sender. Inside was a small piece of drywall, my drywall, the same off-white paint, the same texture, and written across it in the same shaky handwriting was a new sentence. "I miss the wall." When my parents asked me to move back home for a few months, I didn't hesitate. My little sister Lily had been having night episodes, as they called them. Nightmares, sleep paralysis, panic attacks, they weren't sure. All they really knew was that every night at 2:11 a.m., Lily woke up screaming that someone had been standing at her bedroom window. At first, everyone brushed it off as her imagination. She was 13, sensitive, and going through a tough school year. Nightmares weren't unusual, but the episodes didn't stop. They escalated, every night at the exact same time. No variation, no randomness. Always 2:11 a.m. My parents had tried everything: therapy, medication, window locks, new curtains. But Lily's fear only sharpened. She refused to sleep unless someone sat with her, and even then she jolted awake at 2:11 as if her body itself remembered the terror. I didn't believe her at first either. I believed she was scared, yes, but the idea that someone was outside her window every single night in suburban Edmonton seemed unlikely. We lived in a quiet cul-de-sac. Rows of near-identical houses, trimmed lawns, nosy neighbors. Hardly the place for a prowler. But when I walked into her room the first night I stayed there, something in the atmosphere put my nerves on edge. Lily's bed faced a large window overlooking the backyard. Beyond the yard was a strip of forest, thin but dense enough for shadows to feel deeper than they should. Even at daylight, the tree line looked like a mouth hiding teeth. That first night, I slept on a mattress beside her bed. She fell asleep, clutching my arm, her breathing shallow. I stayed awake, scrolling my phone, trying not to think about the wooded darkness outside. The house settled. The furnace clicked. The fridge hummed. Ordinary nighttime noises. I nearly fell asleep once or twice. But at 2:11 a.m. on the dot, Lily shot upright with a strangled gasp, clutching my shoulder so hard her nails dug in. Her eyes were wide, her face white, and she pointed at the window without saying a word. My heart hammered as I turned my head. The curtains moved, just slightly, like they'd been touched. Not blown by wind, not shifting from air vents. Touched. I grabbed my phone flashlight and pointed it at the window. Nothing. No face, no shadow. Just saw fabric swaying back into place. Lily shook uncontrollably, whispering, "He was here. He was right here." Her voice wasn't the voice of a girl exaggerating or playing games. It was raw, instinctive, terrified. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the glass so long my eyes burned, but nothing else happened. The next morning, I went into the backyard to check. Snow covered everything in an untouched sheet, except for a single footprint near the window. Not a full print, just the heel, as if someone had stepped there and then carefully wiped away the rest. No trail, no approach, no departure. Just one heel mark, pressed to, deep to be an animal. I didn't show Lily. I didn't tell my parents. I simply brushed the snow flat with my boot and told myself it had to be from before the last snowfall. The second night was worse. Lily begged me not to turn the lights off, so I left a dim lamp on. I stayed on the mattress again, half dozing until the alarm on my phone buzzed at 2:10 a.m., 1 minute before Lily usually woke. I turned it on deliberately, wanting to see if the pattern was real or coincidence. At exactly 2:11, Lily gasped awake again, and at the same moment, something tapped the window. 3 times. Slow, deliberate, not loud, not panicked, not random, intentional. I froze. Lily's fingers gripped my arm with bruising force. The tap wasn't a branch. It wasn't settling glass. It was knuckles. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and inched toward the window. My heart felt too big for my chest. I gently pulled the curtain aside about an inch, just enough to peek. The backyard was empty. Or it appeared empty. Then I saw it. Not a person. A shape. A still, human-sized outline standing partially behind a poplar tree, blending with the dark. Not moving. Not shifting. Just standing. Watching. As soon as my eyes landed on it, I felt something tighten deep in my gut. An instinctive recognition that the shape was facing us. The exact angle of Lily's window. I dropped the curtain and grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But before I could dial, something slid down the glass from the outside. A faint streak, as if someone had dragged 2 fingertips along the window in a slow downward motion. Lily broke into hysterical sobbing. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I checked again. Fresh snow had fallen overnight. The entire yard was covered in a perfect white sheet, except for the spot behind the poplar tree. A small depression, not a footprint, but the outline of someone who had been standing there long enough to warm the snow beneath their boots. I called the police. They came. They looked. They found nothing. They told us to install cameras, motion lights, alarms. They suggested night terrors and imagination amplified by adolescence. They said the snow indentation was animal disturbance. But that night, something changed. He knocked. Not on the window this time, on the wall. 3 short knocks, soft enough that if you didn't know what to listen for, you'd miss them. But we heard them clearly. And when I checked my phone time, it was exactly 2:11 a.m. again. Lily whispered, "He's coming closer." And I realized with a sickening drop in my stomach, she was right. The 3 knocks on the wall didn't sound threatening or loud. That somehow made them worse. They were soft, deliberate taps that traveled through the drywall like someone testing its thickness with their knuckles. Lily grabbed my wrist so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. Her eyes locked on the window, even, though the sound had come from the opposite direction. I stayed completely still, waiting for a second set of knocks, waiting for footsteps, waiting for anything. But the house fell silent again, and the quiet felt heavy, unnatural, as if the entire structure was holding its breath with us. I finally forced myself to move, creeping toward the window and peering through a tiny gap in the curtain. The backyard was empty. No shape behind the tree, no movement at all, only the faint glow of porch lights reflecting off untouched snow. But then, Lily whispered something that made my blood go cold. He wasn't knocking from outside. She pointed at the wall. He was knocking inside. I wanted to tell her that wasn't possible. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her she was imagining things, but the sound had been too clear, too close. Before I could answer, she crawled across the mattress toward me, her voice a shaky whisper. He's closer every night. There was no dramatic scream, no shaking, no panic attack, just a terrified certainty in her voice that I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I checked the small space beneath Lily's window from outside. Snow blanketed everything except one thing. A print near the foundation, too small and compact to be a boot, but too defined to be an animal. I crouched down, heart pounding. It looked like the imprint of a knee. I brushed the snow aside and found another depression nearby. Another knee. Someone had crouched there. Someone had been kneeling beneath her window, not standing. Kneeling to avoid being seen. I didn't tell Lily. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell the police because I knew what they'd say. Instead, I moved the mattress so I was sleeping even closer to the window, angled so I could see both the glass and the hallway. I stayed awake until almost 3 a.m, but nothing happened. I finally drifted into a shallow sleep. I woke to the sound of breathing, not Lily's, and not mine. It was coming from the window. A soft, foggy exhale against the glass. Slow, steady breaths that made faint circles appear in the frost on the inside of the pane. I bolted upright, eyes wide, watching those fog circles expand and fade, like someone just outside was exhaling warm air onto cold glass. Lily stirred beside me and whispered, "Don't look." But I did. A shadow shifted outside, too close, so close it was practically touching the window. I could see the faint outline of a head, shoulders, the silhouette of someone leaning in, inches from the glass. I didn't need to see the face. The shape alone was enough to hollow me out. I grabbed Lily and pulled her out of the room, slamming the door behind us, adrenaline pushing my legs faster than reason. My parents rushed out of their bedroom as we barreled into the hallway. I tried to explain, but the words tangled. My dad grabbed a flashlight and stormed toward Lily's room, while Mom held both of us close. The entire house felt wrong. Too still, too aware, like something outside was listening to every breath. Dad flung the curtains open and shined the flashlight across the backyard. He didn't see anything, but I did. From the hallway, through the gap in the door, I saw something gleam on the snow. A trail, thin, almost invisible, leading from the poplar tree to Lily's window. Not footprints, not a path, a drag mark, as if someone had pulled themselves forward on their stomach. The police came again. This time, they were less dismissive. The officer followed the drag trail with his light, tracking it along the edge of the yard, toward the tree line, where the snow grew denser and more untouched. Then he stopped abruptly and called for backup. He had found what we hadn't noticed before, a second trail, parallel to the first, heading toward the house, not away from it. The officer ordered us inside immediately. By morning, the yard was taped off, and officers were combing through the forest strip behind our house. They found broken twigs, disturbed brush, signs of someone kneeling repeatedly for long periods facing Lily's window. They found a small patch of cleared snow where someone had been lying, and they found a torn piece of dark fabric snagged on a branch at head height. That was enough to place a patrol car outside our house for the next few nights. They told us someone had likely been watching Lily for a long time, weeks, maybe months. They told us to keep the curtains closed, set up cameras, change our routines. They didn't need to tell me twice. I slept in the hallway with a baseball bat the first night. No noises came. On the second night at 2:11 a.m., the window stayed silent. I felt a flicker of hope that he was gone. On the third night at 2:11 a.m., Lily didn't wake up screaming. She slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. On the fourth night, I finally slept more than an hour. On the fifth day, the police called. They had found him, a man in his early 40s living in a makeshift shelter deep in the forest strip. He had been evading detection by crawling through snow instead of walking, staying low, moving only between 2 and 3 a.m. He admitted to watching Lily, but refused to say why. When they arrested him, he had sketches in his pockets, drawings of our house, Lily's window, and crude maps marking his routes. He never touched her. He never broke in. But he knew her schedule. He knew her bedroom. He knew her face. Lily hasn't woken up at 2:11 a.m. since. We moved out that summer. She sleeps in the room farthest from windows now. She keeps her curtains drawn. And whenever the wind rattles the glass at night, she touches my arm gently and whispers, "He can't see us anymore." And I tell her she's right. But sometimes I step outside before bed, just to check the yard. Just to be sure. And every winter, when the snow first falls and the backyard turns white, I stare at the ground beneath her new window and make sure there are no knee prints. When my mom asked me to help clean out the basement of our old house in Calgary, I didn't think it would be anything more than dust, cardboard boxes, and childhood junk I thought I'd thrown away years ago. I was 26, living on my own now, and the house felt smaller than I remembered. Smaller, but strangely heavier. Like the air still held every argument, every secret, every sleepless night from when we were kids. My siblings, Jason and Emily, came too, mostly because Mom had finally decided to sell the place, and she wanted us each to sort through our things before everything got donated. We spent the morning opening boxes, laughing over old drawings and report cards, complaining about the smell of old carpet. For the first hour, it felt nostalgic, safe. Then Jason pulled something out of a box under the shelves that didn't belong to any of us. A camcorder. An old early 2000s black Panasonic with a cracked viewfinder and a battery taped into place with the yellowed electrical tape. None of us recognized it. My mom glanced at it over her shoulder and shrugged. "Probably belonged to your father," she said. Our dad left when I was 11, and none of us had seen him since. Jason pressed the little eject switch on the side, and inside the compartment was a mini DV tape with a label written in shaky handwriting, "Home." My chest tightened when I saw that word. There was something off about the way it was written. Like whoever wrote it wasn't labeling it for others, but reminding themselves what it contained. We plugged the camcorder into the wall and hooked it to the old basement TV. The screen buzzed with static for a moment before an image flickered into place. Grainy nighttime footage. The shot was shaky, pointed at our childhood home from the backyard. Snow covered the grass. The timestamp in the corner read 2007. I was 9 then. The camera zoomed slowly in on our house. No talking, no breathing sounds, just the faint hum of the camcorder's mic. Then the footage cut abruptly. When it came back, the angle had changed. It was inside the house, inside our hallway. The camera pointed at the staircase leading up to our bedrooms. Emily gasped beside me. "This was recorded inside the house," she whispered. The camera panned upward, slowly, like someone trying to remember the layout of the home with each step. It reached the top of the stairs, then turned toward our rooms. The first door it opened was mine. In the video, 9-year-old me was asleep on my side with my blankets half kicked off. The camera zoomed in on my face. Too close. Close enough that the picture pixelated and blurred. I didn't move at all. The shot lingered for almost 30 seconds. Then the camera turned toward Jason's room. He was asleep too, curled in a ball, mouth slightly open. Zoomed in again. Then Emily's. She was only 5. The camera stood over her long enough that I felt adrenaline flush through my body like I was back in that room. Again, vulnerable and unaware, with someone inches from my bed. Mom covered her mouth, eyes wide and terrified. "Who took this?" she whispered. Nobody answered. I didn't want to keep watching, but the camera cut again, transitioning to footage none of us were prepared for. It was still nighttime, timestamped just a few minutes later, but now the angle was from inside my closet, filming through the crack between the doors, filming me sleeping from the darkness of my own closet. My stomach lurched. Jason said something under his breath and stepped closer to the TV. The camera shook slightly, like the person holding it was shifting their weight. Then, very slowly, the closet door opened wider. Not enough to wake me, not enough to creak, just enough to slide into a better angle. 9-year-old me was still sleeping, oblivious. The person filming was in the room with me. The tape cut again. Now the camcorder was on the floor beneath my bed, angled upward through the gap between the mattress and the frame. The shot held for almost a full minute. It was just darkness, the underside of the mattress, and the faint outline of my hanging blanket. No movement except the occasional wiggle as I rolled over. Then something entered the frame from behind the camera. A hand, pale, thin, moving slowly toward the mattress above, like touching the bottom of the bed frame was some kind of ritual. I felt sick. Jason hit pause and turned on the lights. The whole basement looked different now, smaller, darker, and somehow unfamiliar, even though we'd grown up here. Mom sat on one of the old boxes, her hands trembling so badly she couldn't grip her phone. "We have to call someone," she whispered. "The police, someone." I wasn't ready. Part of me needed answers first. "Keep playing it." Jason hesitated, then pressed play. The next shot was the worst so far. The person filming was outside our house again, but this time the angle was lower, crouched behind the backyard fence, and pointed directly at my bedroom window. The timestamp was the next night. My curtains were open just an inch, just enough for the camera to catch the faint glow of my lamp, and the shape of me sitting on the floor, building with Legos. The camera zoomed in until my window filled the frame, and then stayed there, breathing softly behind the mic, watching, waiting. The footage kept jumping nights, dozens of them, weeks, months. Whoever was filming us did it often, regularly, like it was a routine. Sometimes from outside, sometimes from inside. Once from beneath the kitchen table, once from the hallway again, once from the basement vent, angling upward into the living room. Mom grabbed my arm suddenly. "Stop." But Jason didn't. The footage changed again. The timestamp was 5 years later, 2012. I was 14. The camera was back inside the house, not through windows, not through closets. In the basement. In this basement, right where we were, standing. I felt my knees go weak as I realized the angle. The shot wasn't random. The camera was placed on the floor, hidden behind storage boxes, pointed upward. And on the screen, a much younger version of me walked downstairs into frame, barefoot, unaware, grabbing a soccer ball, then walking away. I walked out of frame, but the camera didn't stop filming. It panned slowly toward the stairs, toward the shadows beneath them, toward... Jason hit pause again. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I couldn't breathe. In the video, in the darkness beneath the basement stairs, was the faint outline of a man's shoe. Not ours, not Dad's, not anyone we ever knew. Someone had been recording us. For years. From inside the house, behind walls, under beds, through vents. And that person had been close enough to touch us. Mom stood up fast. "We're calling the police, now." But as she turned to grab her phone, we all froze. Because from somewhere in the basement, not on the TV, not from the tape, we heard something shift. A soft scrape, behind the furnace, like someone adjusting their weight. The sound wasn't old house noise. It wasn't pipes. It was footsteps. Slow, careful, human, and very, very close. The scrape behind the furnace froze all three of us where we stood. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. The kind of sound you only hear when someone is trying not to make noise. And failing. Jason instinctively stepped closer to me and Mom clutched the railing of the basement stairs like she was preparing to run, but couldn't remember how her legs worked. The basement felt smaller with that sound in it. The air felt warm and damp, like someone had been breathing in that corner for a long time. I stared toward the furnace, trying to see past the shadows, past the stacks of boxes, past the clutter we'd ignored for years. Every childhood memory I had of this place suddenly felt poisoned, like the basement had never been ours to begin with. Another sound followed, faint fabric brushing metal, someone shifting their weight, someone listening to us as closely as we were listening to them. Mom's voice cracked when she finally whispered, "We need to go, now." Jason nodded and grabbed her arm, but my feet wouldn't move. Not yet. A part of me needed to see, needed to know, because if someone had been filming us for years, if someone had been inside this house while we slept, while we ate, while we lived, then I needed to know who. I took one slow step toward the furnace, then another. Jason hissed my name, begged me to stop, but I couldn't. Something deeper than fear pulled me closer, something like a final answer waiting in the dark. When I was just a few feet away, the furnace clicked on with a loud metallic pop that echoed through the entire room. Mom screamed. Jason stepped in front of her. And for a split second, I thought that was the sound we'd heard. But the footsteps came. Again, soft, quick, retreating. Something, or someone, scrambled deeper behind the furnace, slipping into the narrow crawl space behind the ductwork. The realization hit me like ice water. There was space back there. Space big enough for a person. Space none of us had ever checked, because why would we? It wasn't part of the house's original blueprint. It shouldn't have existed. Jason grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. "We're leaving, now." Mom was already halfway up the stairs, crying, hands shaking so badly she almost missed a step. Jason pushed me in front of him, practically shoving me up the stairs. As he turned to close the basement door, he looked down one last time and froze. The bottom step was no longer empty. Sticking out into the hallway carpet was something small and square, a mini DV tape, fresh, unlabeled. Jason picked it up like it was toxic, fingers trembling, and slammed the basement door shut. Mom locked it, then locked it again, then deadbolted the top lock, even though it didn't fit properly anymore. None of us knew what to say. We didn't even dare breathe too loudly, as if the person behind the furnace could hear us through the floor. We didn't go upstairs. We didn't go outside. We didn't even sit down. We stayed in the hallway, backs to the wall, staring at the tape Jason held between two fingers. Eventually, Mom whispered, "Throw it out." But I couldn't. I took it from Jason and walked toward the living room TV before anyone could stop me. If this was another tape made by whoever was hiding down there, then I needed to see what was on it. And deep down, I already knew it wasn't old footage. Jason followed me, cursing under his breath. Mom begged us not to, but I pushed the tape into the adapter, slid it into the player, and hit play. The screen went dark, then static, then an image formed. It was the basement, recorded tonight. Recorded just a few minutes earlier. The angle was low, hidden somewhere near the furnace. We could see ourselves on the screen. Me, Mom, Jason, digging through boxes, laughing, completely unaware. My stomach twisted violently as I realized the truth. We had been filmed the entire time we were down there. Every moment, every reaction, every second we touched that camcorder. The camera had been rolling while we watched the old tapes. Then it cut to a new angle. Not from behind the furnace, from beneath the basement stairs. A dark, crouched silhouette shifted in the shadows, just enough to let us see the outline of a shoulder, the glint of an eye, the shape of someone lying completely still as we walked right past them earlier. The footage zoomed slightly, stabilizing as though the person filming wanted us to get a better look at the hiding spot. Then the screen flickered again. This time the camera was somewhere else, upstairs, in the hallway, pointed directly at my bedroom door. Mom gasped and covered her mouth. Jason stepped closer to the screen. "Pause it," he muttered. "Pause it. Pause it." But I couldn't, because the footage kept going. The person filming walked slowly down the hall, the camera swaying with each careful step. The lens passed Jason's old room, Emily's, then my door. Then it stopped. The camera turned and pointed into the mirror hanging at the end of the hallway. I felt the blood drain from my face because in the reflection behind the camera, barely visible in the dim light, was the man holding it, middle-aged, pale, breathing heavily, not wearing anything distinctive except for an old torn jacket I didn't recognize. His face blurred slightly, not from editing, but because he was standing too close to the lens. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared into the mirror as if he knew we'd be watching this moment right now. Then the footage jumped again. A final shot. The camcorder was placed on the floor, pointed at the basement stairs. A timestamp in the corner showed 10 minutes into the future. 10 minutes after the moment we stood there, watching. And then we heard it. A loud knock at the front door. All three of us jolted, staring wide-eyed at the entrance to the hallway. Whoever knocked didn't knock again, didn't call out, didn't move, just waited. Jason whispered, "Don't open it." Mom whispered, "Call the police." I whispered nothing because I was staring at the TV screen. The final frame had just changed. It wasn't showing the basement anymore. It wasn't showing the hallway. It was showing our front porch, live footage. The camera angle was low, placed somewhere near the railing. And standing at the door, inches from our doorknob, face just out of frame, was someone wearing the same torn jacket from the tape. The screen glitched once, then went black. The knocking stopped. The police took 20 minutes to arrive. By the time they did, the porch was empty. The yard was empty. But in the snow beside the door, beneath the porch light, were 2 fresh knee prints. We moved that night and never returned to that house. And on the last day before it sold, the realtor called my mom to ask a simple question. Why is there a camcorder on the basement stairs pointed at the front door? The police took that one too. They never told us what was on it. And none of us ever asked, because this time we didn't want to see.